The blizzard didn't ask if she was ready. It just came, screaming through the canyon, ripping through trees, and burying the trail behind her in white silence. Clara staggered forward, every breath a burning needle in her chest. Her coat was torn. Her fingers were blue, and her last match had just died in the wind. She collapsed by the dying fire, a scrap of leather clenched in her hand, the last piece of her brother's saddlebag. She'd followed his tracks for 2 days. Now, they were gone, and no one was coming. Or so she thought, because just as the wind seemed ready to swallow her whole, she heard hooves, slow, steady, like thunder echoing through snow, and through the blur of frost and tears, she saw him, a figure in a wide-brimmed hat, coat flapping like wings, riding straight into the storm. He didn't say a word at first, just reached down with a gloved hand and said, "You ain't dying out here today." Before we jump back and uncover how Clara ended up alone in the wilds, and how a stranger on horseback changed everything, go ahead and introduce yourself in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Dry Creek wasn't on most maps. If it was nothing more than a speck, a name scrawled in small print between 2 larger, more important places. The kind of town where time moved slower, dust clung to every surface like bad memories, and everybody knew everybody, especially the ones they chose not to see. Clara lived in a weather-beaten shack on the edge of town. No one remembered who built it. The porch slanted like it had given up trying to hold itself upright, and a rusted horseshoe hung sideways on the door. Crooked luck for a crooked life. Each morning, Clara rose before the sun and walked into town. With a limp she no longer tried to hide. Her right leg had never healed quite right after the fire. Folks whispered it was God's punishment for something, what no one ever said out loud. In Dry Creek, a woman with a ruined leg and a past she didn't explain was as good as a ghost. She had no family left, no children, no husband, just a long scar across her cheek, white and puckered like lightning frozen in flesh, and a hollow in her heart she no longer tried to fill. They said she was a widow, though no one really knew. Her man had vanished 5 years back during a cattle drive that ended in gunfire and smoke. Some believed he ran. Others swore he was shot and buried beneath the plains. Clara never corrected them. She just stopped speaking about it altogether. What she did do, every day without fail, was clean the old church. The town preacher was long gone, but Clara kept the pews dusted, the candles trimmed, and the windows wiped of ash and bird droppings. Not for faith, not for hope, just for rhythm, something to do while the world turned without her. The townspeople didn't shun her outright, not anymore. They simply forgot her in the room, looked through her when she passed. Children stared until their mothers pulled them close and muttered under their breath. Storekeepers placed her purchases on the counter without looking in her eyes. No one was cruel. They just weren't kind. Whispers followed her like shadows. That's her. You see the limp? Heard she don't hear out of one ear, or maybe both. She was there when it happened, you know. Watched it all burn. Even the sheriff, old McAllister, avoided meeting her gaze. And when Clara did speak, rare as rainfall, her voice came out soft, almost startled, like it had forgotten how to sound human. The town moved on without her. Barn dances, market days, church picnics, all carried on with a cheer she watched from afar, always half in shadow. She was the woman in the corner of the saloon no one offered a drink. The figure on the far hill at sunset, watching wagons roll in and out. Still, she stayed. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because leaving would mean starting somewhere else as that woman again. And in Dry Creek at least, her ghosts were familiar. Before we dive deeper into Clara's journey, just a quick note. I'm Thomas, the voice behind this narration. If you enjoy the way this story sounds, let me know in the comments so we can keep the same voice in future videos. Now back to Clara. She didn't speak of the fire anymore, but sometimes, when the nights were cold and the wind howled just right, she'd sit on the steps of that sagging porch, run her fingers along the edge of the scar, and remember how the world used to be before the blaze took her leg, her hearing in one ear, and everything she loved. It was her brother's land that burned. A feud over cattle boundaries gone too far. Clara had been visiting when they came, 4 men on horseback, masked and silent. By the time the smoke cleared, her brother's ranch was ash, and Clara was the only one left standing. She never gave their names. Not to the sheriff. Not to anyone. And so the whispers began. Some claimed she helped them. Others said she knew who they were and kept it secret. Truth was, no one wanted to believe the killers could have been local men. Easier to blame the woman who didn't fit. So Clara wore their suspicion like she wore her scar, without complaint, without denial. Seasons passed. Her limp worsened. The silence deepened. And still, she remained, tending to the church, walking. The same trail each day, returning to a home where the only voice was her own. But something was changing. She could feel it in the wind. There had been talk of strangers passing through. A new rider seen near the northern ridge. A man with a wide-brimmed hat and a reputation for not staying put. Some said he was hunting someone. Others claimed he was hiding. Clara didn't pay it much mind until she saw him. One morning, as she crossed the creek bed near the church, she spotted a figure on the ridge. A tall man on horseback staring down like he was trying to remember something. He tipped his hat. She didn't wave back, but something in her chest shifted. That was the first time. It wouldn't be the last. She didn't know his name. Not yet, but she could already feel it, like thunder in the distance. Something was coming. The second time Clara saw him, he was leaning against the fence outside the general store, chewing a blade of dry grass like he'd been born with time to waste. He looked out of place. His coat was too clean for Dry Creek, and his boots too worn to belong to a drifter passing through. His hat sat low, shadowing a face lined by dust and sun, and his eyes, those were the strangest part. They weren't looking at anyone in particular, until they found Clara. She paused halfway across the street, sack of flour in one arm, and for a moment, just a flicker, he smiled. Not the kind of smile a man gives a woman he wants something from. No. This one was gentler, curious, not predatory, like he'd stumbled across something unexpected and was still figuring out if it was real. Clara didn't smile back. She kept walking, but she felt it, a shift, like the wind had changed direction. Over the next week, the man appeared like a ghost, never there when expected but always close. He'd show up near the livery, helping the stable hand lift hay bales without being asked, or sitting in the back pew of the empty church while Clara swept dust from the floorboards. He never interrupted her work, never asked questions. He'd just nod when their eyes met, and then go back to whatever it was he wasn't saying. It was 2 weeks before he spoke. Clara was chopping kindling behind the church when she heard his boots crunch the gravel. "You keep that up. You're gonna wear the blade down to nothing," he said, voice low and even. She paused mid-swing, wiped her brow with her sleeve, and turned. "You offering to chop it?" she asked, more edge in her voice than she meant. He shrugged. "Maybe, if you'll let me." Clara didn't answer. She simply handed him the axe. He worked in silence. Strong, sure strikes, the rhythm of someone who'd split wood before. She watched from the steps, arms crossed, unsure why she hadn't told him to go away. When he finished, he leaned on the axe and said, "You don't talk much, do you?" "No one listens much," she replied. He gave a short nod. "Fair enough." She should have ended it there, but something about the way he stood, like he didn't need anything from her, made her ask, "What's your name?" "Wade," he said. "Yours?" "You already know it." Another nod. "I do." Rumors moved fast in Dry Creek. By the next morning, 3 people had seen Clara and the stranger talking behind the church. By sundown, 5 versions of the conversation were being passed around the saloon. Some said he was an outlaw. Others, a bounty hunter. One woman swore he was looking for a missing wife and thought Clara was her. Clara ignored them, as always. But this time, the whispers hit differently. Not because they were cruel, but because part of her wondered if they might scare him off. they didn't. Wade came by again, and again. Always unannounced, always quiet. Sometimes he'd speak, ask a question about the land or the town or the names on the graves behind the church. Sometimes he wouldn't. They'd just sit on the steps in silence, watching the sky bleed orange as the sun dropped behind the hills. She learned little things. That he rode a Mustang named Bramble, that he drank his coffee black, that he'd been south, far enough to see real desert, but never why he was here. One afternoon, while she was repairing a loose shutter on the church, she asked, "You looking for someone?" He was leaning against the post, arms folded. His face didn't change. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe I already found her." She froze. Just a breath. Then looked back at the shutter like it hadn't happened. The forest had a rhythm of its own. The world she'd known, Cold Creek, the wagon train, the whispered rumors, felt distant, like something from another life. Here, she was just Eliza, just a woman trying to survive, a woman who carried both, life and grief in equal measure. But peace doesn't last long in stories like this. One evening, as the fire dimmed and shadows stretched long across the cave walls, Tama's expression changed. His jaw tightened. His shoulders went still. "What is it?" she asked. He stood and looked to the trees. Smoke. She smelled it too, faint but sharp, carried on the shifting wind. Not from their fire, from somewhere deeper in the woods. "They're looking," he said. Eliza's heart dropped. "The wagon train? For me?" Tama nodded once. "They think you're dead. Now they'll want to be sure." They moved quickly. Tama knew the paths others didn't, trails no settler could follow. He led her deeper into the forest, beyond where even the deer dared to tread. But Eliza wasn't the same woman who'd fallen behind in the dust. She was slower, yes, but she didn't complain. She didn't cry. She kept her hand on her belly, and her eyes on Tama's back. 2 days passed in silence. On the third, they found a small creek. As she knelt to drink, Tama crouched beside her. "You don't owe them anything," he said suddenly. She looked up. "They took everything from me. Then take something back." That night they stayed hidden among a grove of cedar trees. Eliza lay awake, listening to the hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the leaves. Then, faintly, she heard something else. Voices. Men. Tama motioned for her to stay still. He moved like smoke between the trees. She watched him disappear into the night, the forest swallowing him whole. Minutes passed, then an hour, and when he returned, his face was grim. "They have dogs," he said. "They're not looking to rescue you. They're looking to bury you." Her heart pounded. "Why?" Tama hesitated. "They fear what they did. People like that, they don't leave witnesses." Her hand drifted to her belly again. Her child stirred, as if sensing the danger. Eliza swallowed hard. "I don't want to hide anymore." Tama met her eyes. "Then don't." The next day they climbed to higher ground. Tama showed her how to mask her scent, how to move against the wind, how to disappear into the trees, and Eliza learned. Because survival, she now understood, was not just about running. It was about choosing when to stop, choosing when to stand. And something inside her had changed. This wasn't about shame anymore, or fear, or even revenge. It was about being seen, truly seen, for the first time, by a man who didn't see a widow, or a limp, or a cursed woman, but a person, a soul. They found an old outpost tucked between the ridges, abandoned but strong. It would do. They'd wait out the pursuers. Let them grow tired. Let them believe the woods had taken her for good. In the quiet that followed, Eliza sat beside Tama on the porch, watching the clouds roll in. "You saved me," she said. He looked at her. Really looked. "No," he said. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you how." She reached for his hand. He let her. And in that touch, rough, warm, real, was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Home. Snow had come early that year. It fell in heavy, wet sheets, turning the forest into a white silence that swallowed sound and movement alike. Eliza sat inside the cabin, the child now a restless weight in her belly, her hands wrapped around a cup of bitter root tea. Tama had gone to trade with a nearby Shawnee band, just for a few days. She'd felt safe enough to let him go. But safety, she was learning, could be a cruel illusion. The knock came on the second day, not the quiet signal Tama used. No. This knock was harsh, loud enough to shake the doorframe. Eliza froze. Then came the voice. "Eliza, you in there?" She knew that voice, Reverend Coates, the very same man who'd once whispered prayers over her dead husband, who'd told the town she needed spiritual cleansing when she began showing signs of pregnancy barely a month later. The man who had watched the wagon train vote to cast her out. He stood there now on her doorstep in the snow. And he was not alone. Two other men flanked him, both familiar. One was Levi Granger, the blacksmith's boy who used to stare at her like she was something foul stuck to the bottom of his boot. The other was Caleb Burns, her husband's cousin, the one who had tried to lay hands on her the night before she was banished. She still had the bruise he gave her, a purple crescent that lingered long after the shame. Eliza backed away from the door. But it was too late. They kicked it in. They didn't strike her at first. Just stood there, snow on their boots, faces smug and righteous. "We came to help," Reverend Coates said, stepping inside as though he belonged there. "You've been living in sin, Eliza, with one of them, bearing a child born of shame." Her breath caught. "Get out," Caleb snorted. "Still got that fire, huh? Even after all that's happened?" Levi looked around the cabin. "So this is where you ran to. Pretty cozy. Maybe we should keep it." "Please." She stepped back again, shielding her belly, with one hand. "Please, just leave." But Caleb didn't. He stepped forward, reached out, and grabbed her wrist. "We're doing you a favor. We'll take you back. Put the baby up in the church orphanage. Let you start clean." Eliza struggled. She scratched, bit, screamed, but 3 men against one worn, pregnant woman? There was no contest. They dragged her outside into the snow, half-dressed, her feet bare. The cold bit into her skin. She cried out, the air ripping through her lungs like broken glass. "This is what happens when women forget their place," the Reverend said, shaking his head. And then, just before darkness claimed her, a fist connected with her temple, and all went black. She came to in a barn, rope around her wrists, straw under her back, the smell of mildew and horses and dust. Her head throbbed. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, she wept. Not loud, not angry, just silent, slow tears. Because this was it, wasn't it? She had dared to believe she could have peace, that she could build something out of the ashes, that maybe she wasn't cursed, that maybe a child born of grief and wilderness could still be loved. But they'd found her, and the world hadn't changed. She curled into herself and waited to be erased. The door creaked open. She didn't look up. Then, warm fingers, calloused, careful, untying the rope. "Tama." She gasped. He didn't speak, just unbound her wrists and wrapped her in his coat. His eyes didn't search hers for thanks or answers. He looked at her bruises, her swollen face, the cuts along her arms. Then back at the door, he didn't ask what they'd done. He already knew. They walked through the storm in silence. Each step was a knife. Snow up to her knees, her body broken, her spirit nearly gone. At one point, she collapsed. "Leave me," she whispered. "It's over." Tama crouched beside her, not angry, not panicked, just there. "No. You don't understand. I do." He didn't try to lift her, just sat beside her in the snow, pulling her against his chest, letting her rest, letting her break. They stayed like that for an hour. 2, until the wind slowed, until her breathing did too, until she whispered, "Why did you come back?" Tama's voice was soft. Because you're worth coming back for. He built a fire beneath, a rock overhang, covered her in hides, fed her with his hands when she was too weak to lift the bowl. She didn't thank him, not because she wasn't grateful, but because there were no words strong enough to contain it. The next day, he spoke. They'll come again. Not just for you. For the child. Eliza looked down at her belly. Then, we fight, she said, and Tama smiled. Not with joy, but with respect. Together. Trust, she learned, didn't return with grand gestures. It came in pieces. A cup of water held steady, a coat laid gently across sore shoulders, a silence that asked for nothing in return. At night they slept side by side, not touching, not yet, but close enough that their breath fogged the same air. He didn't ask for her trust. He earned it. When the contractions started, Eliza didn't scream. She gritted her teeth, gripped Tama's hand, and let the pain wash over her like a tide. The cabin was warm, the fire steady. And Tama, he never left her side. Hours passed. Then came the child. A girl. Tiny. Fierce. Alive. Eliza held her to her chest and sobbed, not in pain, but in awe, because this child was hers. Not a burden, not a shame. A beginning. Tama watched silently, eyes gleaming in the firelight. What will you name her? He asked. Eliza smiled. Hope. And as the snow fell gently outside, they both understood. This was not the end. This was the middle. And from here, everything could change. The cabin stood tall now, stronger than before. The logs were sealed tight against the wind, the roof patched and reinforced with bark and thatch. Eliza had painted the door red, not with paint, but with crushed berries and boiled bark. It bled into the wood like a warning, or a promise. Hope was 6 months old. She was already walking in her strange, clumsy way, arms outstretched like wings, mouth always open in wonder. Her laugh filled the cabin each morning, and each morning Eliza let herself believe that this life was real, that the past had not followed them here. But peace, she had learned, was something you had to fight for. The townsfolk came back. Not all. Just two this time. Caleb and a man Eliza had never seen, older, wiry, with a tin star pinned to his vest and a rifle slung over his shoulder. Marshal Rowe, Caleb said, smiling without warmth. We found the squatter and the savage. Tama stepped out before Eliza could move, bow slung across his back, axe in hand. He said nothing. The marshal did. Got reports of a kidnapped woman, he said, voice flat. Said she's held by force. A preacher's statement. Eliza stepped forward. Her voice was clear. I'm not kidnapped. I'm not held. I'm home. Marshal Rowe squinted at her. And the child? Eliza held Hope close. Mine, and no concern of yours. Rowe looked between them, between the red door and the calm in Eliza's eyes. Then he turned to Caleb. This doesn't look like captivity. Caleb's smile twitched. She's confused, brainwashed. She was meant to be my wife before her husband died. She needs to come back. Her soul needs saving. No, Eliza said. You just hate that I survived you. Marshal Rowe raised an eyebrow. Caleb turned red. They live out here like animals, he barked. He's one of them. He probably killed her husband and took her. Silence fell. Thomas stepped forward. I was in Kentucky when her husband died, he said, his voice calm but unshakable. I saved her from freezing. You left her to die. Marshal Rowe studied him for a long moment, then turned to Eliza again. You sure you're safe? Eliza didn't answer with words. She took Tama's hand. The gesture was simple, undeniable. Rowe nodded once. That's all I needed. He turned his horse and rode back. Caleb stared after him, seething. This isn't over. It is for you, Eliza said, and this time it was her who stepped forward. She slapped him hard, years of silence and shame behind that swing. If I see you again, she said, voice sharp as an arrow, I won't need a man to protect me. I am the danger now. They built a fence that week, not out of fear, but foundation. They had goats, now. 2. and a horse Tama traded for from a passing trader. Eliza had learned to ride again, even with the limp in her left leg. Tama taught her how to shoot, how to listen to the wind, how to trap rabbits and stitch leather. She taught him how to read, sounding out words by candlelight while hope slept between them. They didn't speak of love. Not yet. But it was there, woven into each day. Then came his past. Tama stood on the edge of the property one morning staring at the horizon. "They're coming," he said. "Who?" "Men from my village. My brother among them." "Why now?" He hesitated. "Because I left. Not just the tribe, my duties, my oath. There was war. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't kill settlers. They called me coward. Said I'd lost the spirit." Eliza looked at him. "You didn't lose it, you changed." Tama nodded slowly. "They won't see it that way." They came at dusk. 5 Shawnee men dressed in fur and war paint, their horses silent in the snow. One of them dismounted. His face was older than Tama's, harder. "You left us," he said in Shawnee. "You shamed our father's name, now you live like them?" Tama stood still. "I live with truth. That's more than I can say for you." The man's eyes drifted to Eliza, to the baby. "A half-blood. You shame yourself twice." "She is my daughter," Tama said, "and I will not let you touch her." The older man spat in the snow. "You are no brother of mine." Tama stepped forward. "Then don't call me one." The men turned. No fight, no blood, just a fracture made final. And as they vanished into the trees, Tama did not weep. He simply walked to Eliza and placed his forehead against hers. And in that silent space, they grieved the things they could not keep. Spring came with floods and blossoms. Hope turned one. She learned to speak her first word, "Ma." Eliza wept when she heard it, not because she hadn't believed it possible, but because now she did. The fire returned that year, not the fire of destruction, but of creation. Tama built her a loom. Eliza sewed him a vest. They planted corn and traded for chickens. They branded their first colt with a symbol Tama carved himself, a tree growing from flame. Their home had become a ranch, a life, a legacy. Then came the letter, tied to a rock left at their gate, written in crude handwriting. "We're watching. You're still not welcome." Eliza read it 3 times. Then she fed it to the fire. "Let them watch," she said. "We've built something they can't burn." Tama nodded, and for the first time in either of their lives, they danced, under the stars, bare feet in the dirt. Hope clapping to a rhythm only she could hear. The news spread like wildfire through the town of Dry Hollow. Marshal Rowe returned, this time with an invitation in hand and a question that would ripple through the dusty streets and pews like thunder. Eliza May Turner is to speak at the Sunday gathering, not a trial, not a condemnation, but a choice. And the town was invited to witness it. Eliza stood in front of the old church, her shawl fluttering in the prairie wind. The same steps she once climbed with shame now felt firm beneath her boots. Inside, the pews creaked as townsfolk shifted, whispered, watched. She could see Caleb near the back, arms crossed, jaw tight. She saw widow Marjorie, who once turned her face away. She saw children, wide-eyed, silent. And she saw him. Thomas stood beside the door, not hiding, not defiant, just present, his hand resting on the shoulder of their daughter, who stared at everything with a soft smile and a daisy tucked in her hair. Eliza stepped forward, voice steady. "Some of you left me for dead," she began. "Some of you whispered. Some of you pretended not to see the bruises or hear the cries. A hush fell, and yet here I am. Not because of this town, but because I found something beyond it. A life that wasn't given but built, brick by brick, fire by fire." She looked at Tama. "He didn't save me. He saw me." And then turning back, "I don't need your blessing, but I am offering you mine. If you want to know how to rebuild what you've broken, start with truth. And start with kindness. No applause, no cheers, but a silence that felt like a page turning." After the gathering, she didn't linger. She stepped into the dust, took Tama's hand, and they walked away. Not away in shame, but forward in peace. That night, under a sky full of trembling stars, they married themselves. No preacher, no paper. Just a promise whispered into the wind and sealed with a kiss. Hope danced in the grass, a crown of wildflowers on her head, laughing like the world had just begun again. They named their second child Jonah, after the brother Tama had lost, not to death, but to war and pride. A quiet way of saying, "We still remember you, even if you can't come home." Their ranch grew. So did the respect. Over time, townsfolk came not with judgment, but with curiosity. Some brought eggs, others asked for seeds. A few just watched, trying to understand the strength it took to begin again. And in the winter, when snow dusted the red door and smoke curled from the chimney, Tama would pull her close, and Eliza would whisper, "They can't take this from us," and he would reply, "They never could." This was the story of a woman who was thrown from a wagon train and found not just by a man, but by herself. If that moved you, if something in this quiet miracle stirred, something inside, then you're in the right place. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.